Take it away, Rob.
Hello.
Hello.
It was All Hallows Eve 25 years ago, when the weather turned cold and it started to snow. And if you don't believe that, not one iota, just remember this tale took place in Minnesota. The temperature dropped as the cold caught me in it by 40 degrees in about 20 minutes. Ice crystals cut into me, blown by the wind till they stung and they froze every inch of my skin. My steps became strained, but I pressed on quite glumly, my limbs growing numb and my gait became clumsy. Yet I struggled to make it to some shelter warm before death overtook me along with the storm. And despite all my effort and determination, an end soon came to my attempted migration. So exhausted a finger I barely could lift, I took one last step, then collapsed in a drift. And soon I thought finally I'll see her again, I'll find her in heaven, we'll reunite then. For my life had been plagued for dozens of years by regret and survivor's remorse and tears, or the loss of my one true love so long ago, to whom I'd soon be going, thanks to the snow, that buried and froze me and ushered in death, as my lips cracked around what would be my last breath. But then just as I thought I was ready to die, a stranger mysteriously came wandering by. He was ragged and rugged, his beard full of frost, but remarkably didn't seem frozen or lost. His clothing was tattered, his shoes they were worn. Of poverty I'd say this stranger was born. I knew not from where this destitute man had come, but I knew in an instant he must be a bum. He sat down next to me and we started to chat, and I stayed awake with him, just chewing the fat, and I told him I hadn't been planning on dying, but was caught unaware when the snow started flying. As my body went numb and started to tire, I accepted that this was my time to expire, and looked forward to seeing my true love again in an afterlife filled with lost family and friends. And with that I said just how accustomed I'd grown to meeting my end in the snow all alone. He said dying alone is a terrible fate, and I didn't seem ready. Perhaps I should wait until I had shared my whole life with someone, and maybe then I could consider it done. So I asked him if he had had someone in his life, and he looked at me hauntingly, saying, "Not quite. But although not in life," he leaned in to confide, "I've wandered and found quite a few since I died." With that, I then knew what I had feared the most. This bum I was talking to must be a ghost. So I asked, and he told me that wasn't quite it. More like my own sorrow come to visit a bit. So my loneliness, regret, and survivor's remorse come to comfort me just when it couldn't get worse. He said that's what he was, and he was always there, even when the whole rest of the world didn't care. He said loneliness is our most trusted companion, when by all others we've been abandoned. In our darkest hours, on our coldest nights, it never gives up on us, never takes flight. A constant and comforting routine old sadness that keeps at bay hopelessness, fights off the madness. So he told me his nature, and with no small pride, then invited me while I still lived to confide about the young woman so many years gone, and about how I'd secretly never moved on. How to that day I'd still longed to see her again, and how I looked forward now to my own end. And the stranger just listened to all that I said. He smiled and agreed and nodded his head. He gave me one thing I wanted more than her. He lent me his ear and let me be heard. Then I told him I think that it's really too bad that I'll die here before peace of mind can be had, that I'll never get over the loss of my love, that this pain is one thing I'll not rid myself of. Then he laughed and said, sadly, it's always that way, whether you live 100 years, one or a day. And he said, as if I wasn't already chilled, if that's your only goal, you'll die unfulfilled. So you never stop feeling a loss such as this. It'll always be with you. You'll never know bliss. But the more time that passes, the better you get at accepting what happened and living with it. And that, he said, really is the best you can do, to carry on living, to love anew. So if that was all that kept you alive, a recovery toward which you constantly strive, then maybe it's best you stop living this lie. Perhaps it's your time to let yourself die. But if knowing this, you still have more left to be with your life or your fate or your destiny, then consider allowing yourself to live longer. Don't let this kill you. Let it make you stronger. And in that moment, I realized I want to exist, to carry on, thrive, and grow and persist, to let death come another day, way down the line. Until then, I'll make better use of my time. Unfortunately, I decided too late that letting myself die would be a mistake, for the cold and the ice and the unending wind had taken their toll and were doing me in. My eyelids grew heavy, my head then fell back. Just like falling asleep, the world faded to black. I did not die that night, just so you know. I woke up the next morning, soaked from the snow, in a hospital under a young doctor's care. I asked after the bum who had carried me there, and she told me that I'd wandered in all alone. There was nobody with me. I'd come on my own. Of my Savior no sign was to be had or seen, for all anyone knew, he was only a dream. But if that's all he was still enough to keep me on keeping on when life got too tough. I should have been frozen, I should have been dead, but some unknown force kept me living instead. And if you think that's a lie, or at least apocryphal, just go check the records down at the hospital. And if you're ever alone with your life fading from you and a generous stranger should happen upon you, be they figment or phantom, let them speak their piece. For their words might be just what your dying soul needs. Give them a chance to pick you off the ground, to help turn your decision around. When a random lone wanderer happens on you, or perhaps it's the wandering you yourself do. Or maybe they're your sorrow, come to visit a spell, or maybe you're theirs. You never can tell. I read that once before. It was for a Halloween show last year, which is what I wrote it for. And it's one of those things that has a lot of personal stuff in it. It's an emotional piece for me. I drew on a lot of my own loss to write that one. And I was really afraid of sharing it in public when we did the Halloween show, because generally, in this day and age, exhibiting any sort of vulnerability is a good way to get yourself attacked by strangers on the internet. And I was hesitant right up until I did it, and then after the show there was an audience member who came up who had tears in her eyes and thanked me for it, for both writing and reading it. So I think I probably did well with that. And it occurs to me that, both past and impending loss have been kind of a big theme in a lot of what I've written over the years. I mean, obviously there's a lot of jokes, it's comedy and it's satire, but there's a lot of darkness too. And when I get to the chapters from the upcoming book, there'll be a lot of that in there too. In that book, our hero is a young woman named Lex, and as the story opens, she's pretty much lost everyone in whom she thought she could find some comfort. She's also survived a workplace shooting. I'm not going to read Chapter 1. Chapter 1 is amazing. It's engaging, it's violent, it's fast-paced, but the real meat of the plot starts in Chapter 3, so I'm going to start with Chapter 3 tonight. And she spends the book sort of dwelling on a lot of this stuff, and that'll come, come more to fruition as I read that stuff. I also wanted to read a bunch of things that I haven't read before in front of an audience, or it's been a long time since I've read them in front of an audience. Now, quite a few years back, there was an anthology called Sinister Bedfellows that came out, where a bunch of artists were recruited to do a short story based on a panel of a popular webcomic at the time. And the one that I got was a panel that just said every act of creation is a self-portrait. And I decided to make that about bad relationships that stick with you, which is also something my character in the book dwells on a lot. I see a little bit of me in your eyes, a tiny fading facsimile frowning back from within those deep black and empty discs. Smooth, polished obsidian shines beneath a teary gloss. You're a crying mirror, and I'm the fairest of them all, so reflect and watch me walk away. You and your forerunners were soft and supple stepping stones, and I'll step on plenty more. In time, you'll learn to walk like this, beating a path through the presence and back to better memories. The spark of a first touch, the pungent stink of unbridled desires, the quickened beating of broken heart halves fused into one. You'll learn as I have to make and make anew in the malleable clay of would-be lovers to come. I built you from the shards of a broken being, pieced you together as I saw fit and made you whole. You'll break again and again, but you'll lay down a foundation on the chunks of those to whom you do the same. You'll learn to build, too. You'll spread like a virus. The mark my maker passed to me is on you now, like a herpes, forever. As I leave, my back's reflection fading to a speck within the iris, I go knowing that you'll carry on without me as I will you. What we had was perpetual, incessant, and unrelenting. I made you in my own image. Now you're a time bomb. Tick away. And that's in, I have this book for sale. It came out in 2012. It's the newest thing I have, because the novel's not out yet. If you want those, they're $15, and I'll be glad to sell them and sign them for you after the reading. Let's do the first excerpt from the book. Now, this book is, I can't take credit for it other than actually having typed it and thought of the story. Like, I guess that's some credit I can take, but there was a lot of inspiration to make the book happen. One of the people who was most inspiring is a local visual artist named Leslie Barlow, who I was covering when I was working as an arts critic. And she was doing art that is very specifically about being multiracial and mixed race, and how we and others around us sort of identify ourselves because of that. And I'm, for those who don't know, I'm Ho-Chunk on my mother's side. I'm clearly very white passing, and most of the time the world treats me like I'm white until sometimes it doesn't. But it does sort of like have a lot of bearing over sort of my introspection and the things that I think about and do. And I wanted to write a character that reflects that. So my character is a young Native woman who is also very white passing until she's not. And like in chapter 1, before there's the big work shooting, a couple of her coworkers are giving her a hard time because they don't know what race she is, and she's trying to explain it to them, and they're not taking her seriously. They both get shot up, so justice was served. Now, one of the there are a few like ongoing gags that have to do with particularly with Lex in the story and her identity and her ethnicity, and one of them is based on a thing I've seen a few times. See, a few years back, I had a teacher friend of mine who was telling me about the difficulties they were having getting like, racism out of their classroom, and I was just like, what's so difficult about that? Just stop being racist, right? And she told me, you know, you can do that a lot, but sometimes someone says or does something racist without even realizing it. And I stopped her and I was like, get out of here. How can somebody be racist and not know they're being racist? And she said, well, you know, it's probably like sometimes maybe you're being sexist and you don't know you're being sexist. And I said, well, actually. And she was very calm, and she was patient, and she talked me down off of that ledge, and she started going into specific things about what they were doing. And one of the things that she was most proud of was they were no longer having the kids sit Indian style, as they used to say back in the day. And I was like, oh, great, so you're just having the kids sit, what, cross-legged now? And she says, no, we're having them sit I style. And I said, okay. But what if the kids ask what the I stands for? And she's like, well, we're not going to lie to them. It stands for Indian, duh. And that was this sort of behavior. I was at an ex's wedding last year, and at the reception, I was seated at a table with another ex. And someone had, and someone had asked her how she knew the bride, and she said, oh, we're Eskimo sisters. And the other Native guy at the table said, I don't remember exact words, but he said something along the lines of, the fuck did you just say? And she goes, oh, I'm sorry, that was racist. We're Inuit sisters. So there are a lot of times when people become aware that there's something that they're doing offensive, but they change the language instead of changing the actual thing or the intent behind it, and then they think they've done a good job. So there's a lot of that going on in the first book, or in the chapter I'm about to read. So for setup, she's working in a call center of a completely fictional retail giant with its corporate headquarters down in 10th and Nicollet. It's called Bullseye. And she's the sole survivor of this workplace shooting that happened the day before. Now when the cops finally showed up, they found her there alone, the sole survivor among all the bodies. And they took one look at her black hair and her swarthy complexion, and they said, we have the shooter, she's a Muslim. She goes to jail. She's mysteriously released from jail in the middle of the night. She goes home to try and sleep, but the temp agency calls and tells her she has to go back to work if she ever wants to work in that town again. And she's already burned through every other temp agency in town, so she's got to go. So she gets out of bed, she struggles, and although on one hand she was injured, sore, exhausted, afraid, alone, and barely functional, on the other hand, she'd still be all those things at the end of the day. She'd be them if she went back to work, she'd be them if she stayed home too, but she'd also be broke and unemployed. So she decided on the lesser of two evils, which comes to be another theme throughout the book, and she hopped on a bus back to work. Lex bussed back to work, which lent her the chance of a glance at another passenger's newspaper. She read the front page. Its headline proclaimed that a terrorist had stormed Bullseye corporate headquarters. The subhead said that the young woman had been captured alive and was now in custody. She peered intently from her seat at the center of the bus toward the reader, who was closer to the front, and she tried to make out more of the article, but she couldn't. She couldn't see whether or not she was named or pictured in it. At her stop, she stepped off the bus on the sidewalk across the street, and she looked left and right and left again to be sure the path was safe before stepping onto the crosswalk. As soon as she did, she was clipped by a speeding bicyclist. Lex caught and righted herself, then grabbed her shoulder on the side where she was hit and rubbed it unconsciously, looking up as she did to see the cyclist speeding down the block, his legs pedaling hard while his upper body twisted. This allowed him to look back, make an obscene gesture, and shout some unkind words at Lex while he sped away. She shouted, "Hey, look where you're going!" He shouted back, "No, you look where you're going!" She shouted again, "No, really, look where you're..." But it was too late. His attention on her, he had failed to notice the confectionery food truck in his path. He smashed into it with a racket of curses and clanging metal. Its back door swung open. Ice cream, cake, candy, and yogurt spilled from the truck and onto the downed cyclist, and Lex watched as just desserts fell upon him. The sidewalk surrounding Bullseye was littered with flowers, mourners, and reporters. Lex kept her head low and slunk through the crowd. Once inside, she swiped her badge at the security desk and ducked into an elevator. Out of habit, she ran her finger over the empty space on the panel where the 13th floor button should be. And when she reached her own floor and the doors slid open, she stepped through into a surreally quiet facsimile of what her workplace formerly was. She skirted past tape outlines and carpet stained red and found her way to her desk. The Becky's brain still spotted her cube wall, and she picked at those pink and red chunks with a tissue like she might have done with so many carelessly smeared boogers. She turned on her computer, then tried several passwords before remembering which one the computer had last made her set. She donned her headset and joined the call queue and immediately began taking calls. At no time did the heart-wrenching absurdity of her situation escape her notice. 3 managers, all named Brad, and each in a slightly better suit than the last, came by to talk to her. They all told her the same thing. They were sorry she'd been so troubled. Bullseye was dedicated to ensuring a safe space for her and all of her coworkers. If there was anything she needed, theirs was an open-door policy. Each also explained that he was replacing the last, as the department had decided to go in a different direction and the previous management had been reassigned. The final Brad made most of the same speech, but also added that the different direction they decided to go included Lex's removal as well. Now, hearing this, she braced to be fired, and then to be told by her staffing agency that she'd never work in Minneapolis again. She braced herself against the inevitable eviction, against her lack of options, and against not having so much as a car to sleep in when the time comes. She was a forward thinker like that. The problem wasn't just a problem, it was every problem poised to follow, and needless to say, the prospect of every problem tailing the immediate one was more than she thought she could handle. So she stayed quiet and listened, waiting to be told that security would soon be there to escort her out. At that point, she became overwhelmingly aware of the additional problems waiting for her if any member of the crowd outside should happen to recognize her, or if any of them singled her out as the terrorist who may or may not have been named under the morning's headlines, and if any of them went on to connect her to their friends' and loved ones' death the day before. None of that which she braced herself for happened, though. Instead, Brad told her that she was being taken out of the call center. In fact, the ambition she had shown during the shooting had impressed everyone, from those within his own ranks on up to the top of the executive floors. He told her she was going to be offered a new position upstairs, all the way upstairs where the big boys' corner offices looked down on everything but the IDS and Capella. And when he saw that her response was mostly one of silent, fearful doubt, he also told her how much she'd be making in her new position. Then he added that that was a lot more than he got, and he wished her luck, and he took her headset and motioned her toward the elevator. She sat there, staring in disbelief for a moment. Then it occurred to her that of all the things she'd been through in the last 24 hours, this was among the least worthy of her disbelief. So she took the elevator up to the 27th floor and then stepped out to find that all the disbelief in the world probably wasn't enough for what waited there. See, in many ways, the top floor at Bullseye looked like she would have imagined any executive floor if she'd ever before imagined such a thing. On the topic of floors, this one was marble. It had dark and glossy gray-green sheen with duller veins of white and cream. It was hard and cold to the touch. It was so hard and so cold that she could feel it through her boots, and it complemented the hard, cold atmosphere of the rest of the place. Everything was uncannily clean, so much that the walls, desks, and doorknobs she could see all sparkled in the light shining in through floor to ceiling windows. Now this much was probably ordinary enough. Where the top floor veered away from her expectations was in the rest of its ambience. There were what sounded like distant, tortured screams coming from somewhere. She couldn't tell where. Wherever she walked in the reception area, they sounded just as far away. There were also pictures done in stained glass of what looked to be monsters and demons waging a war against angels and men. There was a slight smell of sulfur and brimstone lingering, perhaps from the ornamental torches that hung on the walls and burned. The candy dish on the receptionist's desk contained only Red Hots. If Lex didn't know better, she'd think she'd just stepped into Hell's Lobby, which, by the way, she had. She took a small handful of Red Hots and ate them one or two at a time as she leaned on the receptionist's cold, clean desk. The woman behind it was about Lex's age, perhaps a few years older, but with the clothing and countenance to portray a more mature sense of sophistication. Her thick, blonde hair framed a thin, tanned face hidden behind the most perfect makeup Lex had ever seen. The woman looked up at Lex with brown, mascara-deepened eyes and blinked at the sight of her. Without a word, she reached for her phone and dialed without looking, her burgundy nails gliding from one number to the next like the hands of a seasoned surgeon dissecting cadavers. "Excuse me," said Lex, her voice cracking. She then tried to swallow, gulp, and clear her throat all at once. This she hoped would get her tone under control. It didn't, so she introduced herself with as much certainty and confidence as she could muster, which was none at all. The receptionist raised a single, perfectly sculpted eyebrow and looked Lex up and down with a deliberate motion, followed by a slight bite of her lower lip. Then she glanced at her monitor before she slowly stopped dialing. She squinted briefly, then nodded slightly to herself, then looked back at Lex and locked eyes. "Oh," she said. Lex waited, assuming there was more, and when there didn't seem to be, Lex offered more herself. "I'm from the call center," she explained. "Brad told me I was being transferred." With that, the receptionist looked back at her screen and squinted again, as if trying to dispel something troublesome with a look alone. She then looked back at Lex, then the screen, then Lex again, and so on, and after a bit more of that, she finally settled her gaze back on Lex and engaged her. "Nice to meet you, Lex," she said. Then she added, "Is it Lex, or do you go by Lexi, or Alexis, or—" "I go by Lex," she replied, forcing the most convincing smile she could manage. That smile must have been a good one, because the woman behind the desk complimented her on the niceness of it while returning one of her own that was, as far as Lex could tell, the nicest and probably most expensive smile she'd ever seen. In fact, Lex felt herself blush a little at the sight of it. "Well, it's nice to meet you too," she said, still smiling. "And I'm Summer, and if you'll follow me, I'll take you over to Russ Hummelgard's office." Now, Summer led her to the excessively large corner office of Russ Hummelgard, who was Bullseye's CEO. And Lex argued with herself internally as she followed, mostly over whether or not it was appropriate to notice Summer's figure, and if so, just how much and how long she should look. Now, this was the kind of internal argument Lex had when she was too fatigued to summon any social propriety naturally, and she felt such fatigue often, as those who sleep too little often do, but at this time it was made more intense by her current state of exhaustion. She was tired and sore enough that her vision was narrow, a low buzz pestered her hearing, her faculties were slow, and her speech was also slow to come and stammer-ridden. She cut the internal monologue short, though, and so as not to get nosed for the wrong reasons, and looked instead at the demonic decor to her left and right as she followed Summer to the imposing oak door, and then into the office. It was even cleaner and even elusively creepier than the rest of what she'd seen, and it was also devoid of people. "I'm afraid Mr. Hummelgard is in a meeting," said Summer, "but have a seat, and he'll be with you as soon as he can." So Lex thanked her, and she sat down before an expansive desk made of polished, expensive-looking wood. She then shifted in her seat, trying in vain to get comfortable. "Can I get you anything while you wait?" Summer asked, "like some bottled water or a drink?" "No," said Lex, "thank you." She looked down at her feet to hide her expression, which she was sure betrayed the fact that she felt completely out of place. Then she noticed the extent to which her scuffed boots clashed with the smooth marble. She then looked further up at her pants and picked with chewed nails at an old food stain. Then she moved up and fidgeted with her vest before finally accepting that everything she was doing to try and look comfortable was failing. Rather than looking comfortable, she looked like someone trying really hard not to do so. Now, Summer stifled a giggle as she left the room, and as Lex consigned herself to having already failed the interview she was yet to have, she took some small comfort in at least having made a pretty girl giggle, no matter that context was a bit unflattering. Now, she lost track of the time she spent waiting. She passed the time by meticulously trimming her nails with her teeth. She bit one nail to smooth its edge, then accidentally made it jagged, then bit some more of it to try and smooth it out again. She soon got down to the quick. Then she closed her hand around the now tender fingertip and ground her teeth against the sharp, tearing pain that caused. A moment later, she went on to the next nail. She attended carefully to, and then gave up in frustration on, her thumbnail and those on two other fingers, and she was just getting to her pinky when the office door swung open, and a man she could only assume was Russ Hummelgard came in. A thick and corn-fed trunk of a man, his silver crew cut framed a blocky face with a button nose, glaring eyes, and no discernible neck or chin. Lex couldn't help but look at him and see a playground bully stereotype, all grown up and draped in Armani and Rolex. He brushed past her, barely noticing as he rounded his desk and sat down with the practiced posture of a man who habitually said, via body language alone, that he was the man in charge. He slapped a manila folder onto the desk and exhaled, scanned the surface with his eyes, picked at some unimagined dust and flicked it away. Then he looked up at Lex. Then his eyes widened, his mouth briefly fell open, and then he regained his composure and glowered down his nose at her. "Can I help you?" he said, then punctuated the question with a derisive, "Young lady?" "I'm waiting for Russ," Lex said. "Is that you?" "It is," he said, "but I'm afraid I can't see you now. I'm supposed to be meeting with a potential new team member." "Oh," said Lex, intending to add, "that's me," but he cut her off before she could, as he stood and came around to her side of the desk. Then he gestured her up and shooed her out the door. "You can wait in the lobby," he said. "Summer will get you anything you need, and I'll be with you as soon as I can." With that, he pushed her through the door and lightly slammed it behind her. Lex opened her mouth to say something, then shut it, then opened it again. She let her jaw hang there, uncertain about whether or not to close it back up again, and then she turned, hung her head, and walked back towards Summer's desk. Summer saw her coming and commented to the effect that that was the fastest interview she'd ever seen, and then asked Lex if she got the job. Lex fumbled a bit for the right words to express her confusion, dropped whatever words she had, and just said that Mr. Hummelgard had sent her away on account of a more important meeting. Summer gave Lex a doubtful look, then checked her calendar again and declared that there were no other meetings scheduled. "He's just being coy," Summer told her. "He does that." Then she got up and ushered Lex back to the office, pushed open the door, and pushed her through. And as Lex went back in, Summer slammed the door behind her, somewhat less lightly than it had been previously slammed. Russ looked up from his desk again, and again looked briefly surprised before simply annoyed. "I don't know who you think you are," he began. This time Lex cut him off. "Lex," she said, "I'm Lex Lewis. I was supposed to meet with you." "Don't be silly, young lady," he scoffed. "Lex is a man." "No, really," she said, her voice pleading. "I'm Lex." He blinked in disbelief and asked, "You're the one from my call center?" "Yes, sir," she said. "The sole survivor, the one who fought that Muslim woman?" "No," she stammered, "I am the Muslim woman. I mean, I'm not, but..." "Well, this must be a mistake," he huffed. Then he stood and shouted for Summer as he stormed toward the door. Now, Summer appeared speedily through the door, as though she'd been standing on the other side of it the whole time, waiting for her inevitable summoning, which she had. Lex sunk a little where she stood as Russ and Summer argued back and forth over whether or not she was indeed the candidate he wanted to see. Summer won the argument, and Russ sighed in resignation as he dismissed her. He then motioned for Lex to take a seat again as he rounded the desk and retook his own. A long, uncomfortable silence followed as he glanced around the room and composed his thoughts. Lex brushed abashedly at the stain on her pants. Finally, he said, "I understand it took all night to get your charges dropped. I'm sorry about that. We had a lot going on, as I'm sure you understand." "Yeah," said Lex. "How did you..." He cut her off. "This is bullseye," he said. "We practically own this town. The police do what we tell them, and we told them that they won't bother you again." Trying not to sound ungrateful, Lex then asked why. "Well, you showed spirit yesterday," he said. "We don't usually see that kind of spirit in the kind of people we put in call centers, so I wanted to bring you up here and see for myself just what kind of a man you are." As he heard his own words, he gulped and paused. He took a moment to think of a recovery, then settled on pretending that either he hadn't said it or Lex hadn't heard it. He went on, "It wasn't just the bottom of the barrel we lost yesterday. That terrorist got up here, too. She pushed one of my best guys down the elevator shaft." And Lex refrained from correcting the shooter's gender. "And," said Russ, "quite frankly, we thought anyone who could take down an armed terrorist single-handedly was probably made of the right stuff for upper management. So, we'll need you to fill in as my right-hand, man." Among the various questions that came to mind, the one Lex settled on was, "So you're hiring me?" No, he said. "You'll still be a temp. But..." "Now, did Brad go over the compensation with you?" Lex nodded. "Well," he said, "I'm afraid that was a mistake." She braced herself yet again to be shown the door, but that didn't happen. Instead, Russ went on. "That number was for a more qualified individual," he said. "Someone with more and better qualities than yourself. I mean, we'll still give you the job, but we can only offer you this much." With that, he took an expensive pen from a drawer and wrote a number on a slip of paper, which he then turned over and slid across the desk. Lex flipped it back over and looked at the number, which was considerably less than Brad's number, yet considerably more than she had ever made or, frankly, ever expected to make. And even as her heart sank with the realization that she now turned out to be less wanted than she'd been led to believe, she perked up at the realization that she was, in fact, still somewhat wanted. She folded the paper and placed it in her pocket, then said in the meekest of confident tones, "Okay. The thing is," he went on, as though he'd prepared a lengthy argument in defense of his case and he wasn't going to let a little thing like its lack of necessity stop him now, "there are certain expectations that come along with this position. It's a position of authority and responsibility, and in our corporate culture, that's the thing we typically find in men." Lex didn't have the slightest clue as how she should respond, so she kept quiet and waited to hear more. He took her silence as a cue to get nervous, and his own nervousness as a cue to keep talking, to keep the ever more uncomfortable silence at bay. Now, I don't mean that women can't do this kind of work, he said. They're just typically better suited to something else. I mean, not that we never hire women for executive roles. It's just that when we do, we like to hire more than just a woman. You know what I mean? I really don't, she said honestly. I mean, and he waved his hands in loose circles around him as he paused, as if grasping for the right words, like so much cotton candy from the air. Then it just got worse. If you were not only a woman, he said, but a minority, that would be something. Now that we could use. Now there were infinite possible responses Lex could have offered, nearly all of which were appropriately confrontational. Most of the others were understandably scolding and rightfully indignant. Many of the last few just confused and disbelieving. Of all, there was only one that wouldn't end this meeting then and there. She could say just one thing that wouldn't likely lead to her giving him the tell-off he so rightly deserves, so she said that. If it helps, she said, I'm Indian. And his eyes lit up. Then he gave her a look and said, wait a minute, don't your people usually work in IT? Not that I know of, said Lex. Huh. Well, you must be from one of the lighter parts, he said, like Ben Kingsley. Now, Lex didn't know the name, so she asked, was that someone else in the call center? No, said Russ. Who was Gandhi? Oh, no, she offered awkwardly. I mean, I'm Native American. Oh, well, that won't work, he said. I need a real minority. Lex asked, what? Like a black woman, Russ said. But not too black, you know? Lex exclaimed, what? Or a nice Hispanic. Lex sighed, her inflection vaguely questioning, and just said, what? Good workers, those Hispanics, he said. Now, one might casually observe at this point that Lex should have been on her way to HR. But any casual observer who'd see that as a solution has likely never been a temp in this situation. Lex had, and having been one, she knew that taking any such issue to HR was an assured path to no longer being a temp in this situation. Rather, doing so would be the first step on a long journey full of offered explanations offered during future job interviews. Now, she also knew that any future job interviews and opportunities were unlikely to offer the same compensation that they had, and that she had written down, folded, and tucked into her pocket, so she just kept quiet. Now, Jack went on to muse, unless Lex held her breath, not knowing how his statement could possibly be any worse than the last, yet somehow knowing it would be. Then he asked, are you a lesbian? What? She asked, why? Well, the short hair, he said, for a start. She's like, my hair isn't that short. Well, it's in a man bun, said Russ. It's just a bun, she said. And he went on, you're wearing men's slacks. I like pockets, she offered. Seriously? Sure, he said dismissively, but are you a lesbian or not? She hesitated, then offered, it's not that simple. Oh, he said, you're a bisexual. Lex said, I think orientation is more complicated than... Hold on, he said. Then he clicked his mouse a couple of times and scrolled through something Lex couldn't see on his screen. He kept Lex waiting in silence as he found what he was looking for. Then he read through it. Sorry about the wait, he said. HR sent me an email on this. You're a pansexual. Is that what we're calling them now? Frustrated, she said, just say gay. Fine, he said. Are you a gay? Now, Lex hated labels, but she hated poverty more. So she said, I prefer girls. Great, he exclaimed. Great? Yeah, we can probably use that, he said. I mean, maybe not. Maybe it won't come up, but if it does, said Lex, I'm a lesbian, right? Hey, you learn quick. Now, let's talk about changing your name. Something more ethnic, maybe Hispanic. Said Lex, why would I? Because, he said, cutting her off, you'll look better on paper if you're gay and a minority. But I am, she started, then sighed and changed her tack. I mean, isn't that kind of, I don't know, disingenuous? Russ asked, what do you mean? Just what I said Lex. It's disingenuous. I heard you, said Russ. I don't know what that word means. Oh, she said, hoping to mask her ever-growing discomfort. It means dishonest. Oh, maybe, but it's a standard practice. We do it all the time, and no one ever complained before. Lex stammered as she asked, all the time? Sure, said Ross. At Bullseye, we believe in diversity. We are diversity proactive. Lex repeated the words, diversity proactive. That's right, he said. Communications came up with it. Sounds good, doesn't it? I guess. The problem, he says, is going out and recruiting real minorities costs a lot. And it's a lot of work, and you never know what you're going to get. Excuse me, Lex said, but Russ did not excuse her. Instead, he went on to explain with some pride how Bullseye had overcome this problem. Karen Salinas at HR thought it up, he said. She ran the numbers and we found out that it costs significantly less to pay for a legal name change than it does to recruit minorities. And the benefit was higher too. So we put together a whole task force just to get the ball rolling. And once that was done, we were one of the most diverse companies in Minneapolis. But before, we were almost a completely white company. Now we're 50% minorities, and that number is only getting bigger. He glowed as he bragged, openly boasting and honestly convinced that he was recounting something good. But, said Lex, I interviewed with Karen Salinas. She's Latina. How does a Latina woman sign off on something like this? You mean she's Latina now, said Lex. Before the Minority Recruitment Initiative, she was Karen Owens. She was Welsh or Dutch or something. Default white, anyway. I'm not changing my name for this, said Lex. Suit yourself, said Russ. Stay white, then. I'm not! Lex caught herself, stopped talking, took a deep breath, and collected her thoughts. She contemplated briefly the ever deeper layers of absurdity in which she was wading, and she noted quietly to herself that she belonged to an ethnic group whose racial identity was federally defined. Hers was the only ethnic group in America that carried required documentation which identified it specifically by race, and here she was, about to willingly surround herself with others who face no such requirement but are willingly signing their names on documents to purport ethnicity. She could not wrap her mind around this irony. Her mind, fatigued as it was, couldn't wrap around much at all, so rather than dig deeper into the unfathomable, she simply accepted the job. Russ wrote Lex a check as an advance on her pay. He then advised her to use it for some new clothes, maybe a haircut, and definitely some makeup. If she wanted to work on the executive floor, he told her she'd have to clean herself up. She pocketed the check for later, then reported to Karen Salinas down in HR. There she signed her name over and over on various papers, contracts, agreements, and other documents. Karen, an airbrushed, freckled, basic blonde, handed her an executive employee handbook and a code of conduct book, each over 2 inches thick, and a pamphlet outlining her job description. Read those, Karen told her, and if you want to go up and get settled in today, you can, but obviously you won't actually start the job until tomorrow. I haven't even been told what the job is, said Lex. Oh, Karen said, well, that's simple. You're the acting executive vice president of the apocalypse. Okay, said Lex, and what's the apocalypse? The end of the world, Karen said condescendingly. Didn't they tell you anything upstairs? You mean that literally, asked Lex, don't you? No, said Karen. I'm sure they told you something. I mean about the apocalypse, said Lex. Karen paused and looked genuinely surprised and said, they really didn't tell you about that. It must have slipped their minds, said Lex, though I can't imagine how. Well, said Karen, it's all there in your employee handbook. I suggest you familiarize yourself with it by tomorrow. Oh, said Lex, and is there anything in here about the Minority Recruitment Initiative? Yeah, said Karen. Word came down that you refused the name change. Why is that, Lex? Don't you want to be a woman of color? I already am, said Lex. Oh, said Karen, sure, I suppose your father must be white. Well, what about using your mother's maiden name? Her maiden name was Koenig, said Lex. My mother was white. My father was Ho-Chunk. Weird, said Karen. Was his father white? No, said Lex, tugging uncomfortably at her collar. My mother and my grandmother were white, and the men on my father's side were Indian going back to my great-grandfather. Oh, said Karen, perking up. Then your great-grandfather had a Native American name. Let's use that. It was Pierce, Lex said, sighing. Karen stared at her, an expression mixing blankness and frustration spreading across her face. Lex went on to offer, he got his last name from the county he was born in. Oh, said Karen, so your father's from Lewis County. No, said Lex, my father is from Blue Earth County. Oh, Karen exclaimed, that I can work with. Let's see, Lex Blue Earth. Lex squirmed. Karen frowned and went on. Doesn't really roll off the tongue, though. What if we found you another name? How about Mackenzie Blue Earth? I like the sound of that. I don't think I do, said Lex. All right, said Karen. It's not our only option. There's a whole Tumblr dedicated to coming up with Native American names. Let me just get that up and we'll pick one from there. Now, Lex, growing ever more anxious, tried to halt Karen on her course. This she did by seeking some compromise. You know, my father used to call me Hinu, she said. Can we maybe go with that? Oh, that won't work, said Karen. It has to be something people can remember or pronounce. But I just pronounced it for you, said Lex. No, said Karen. We definitely need something with adjectives and nouns. You know, I think I'll just stick with my real name, said Lex. Oh, Karen said with a pitying tone. You're a self-hating woman of color, aren't you? What? No! It's all right, said Karen. No one here is judging you for that. I used to be just like you know, until I learned to embrace my Latina heritage. But, Lex said hesitantly, Russ told me you used to be Karen Owens and that this whole name-changing policy was your idea. Oh, she said with a stop. He told you that? Yeah, Lex said as she shrunk a little, bracing herself. Well, it was, said Karen. And I was. And now that I'm Latina, I fully embrace my heritage. Lex kept quiet as she tried to process what she was being told, and Karen went on. Someday, she said, you'll learn to embrace yours too. Then we can talk about getting you a name that more accurately reflects your, what are you called again? Lex said, Ho-Chunk? Right, your Ho-Chunk heritage, she said, placing air quotes around the words. When you're ready to embrace your Ho-Chunk heritage, let me know so we can change your name to something more authentic. Karen, said Lex, can I ask you something else about this? Of course you can, she said, donning a practiced smile and adding, I have an open door policy for questions. She placed air quotes around the words open and door as she spoke. I was just curious, said Lex, about why you chose Salinas. I mean, if you want authenticity, why not go with like Garcia or Rodriguez or Hernandez or Lopez, something like that, some more common name. Karen laughed at the notion and said, those? God no, those all sound fake. That's chapter 3. How late did we go? 7:45?
Including reception.
Okay, so 7:30?
Say about another 10 minutes.
Then I will just jump into the other chapter I brought. This is chapter 14. It's the end of the second act. Later on in the story, Lex is getting chased around town by these incompetent assassins who are basically using a shared economy app like Uber, but for contract killers. Through the Reaper app, R-E-E-P-R, they track their targets and execute them as discreetly as possible, but they're not doing that well with Lex. She handles most of them pretty easily, but one of them turns out to be an old friend, and she just can't bring herself to finish him off when they meet. So, Summer, who we met in chapter 3, gets the idea to take her to the secret fairy world that exists alongside ours, because you always have to have one of those in these stories. And they go there to get help from a race of bureaucrats called the Perry. Summer walked into the Perry's office. Lex followed. The Perry, annoyed by the intrusion, rose from her desk and moved to intercept the woman, but she stopped in her tracks when Summer said rather casually, Hi, Fred. Now, the Perry in question grimaced for one primary particular reason, which stemmed from several lesser particular reasons. See, the Perry were, and I'll skip over a bunch for time's concerns, but the Perry are basically, they don't have names. They are Perry. Plural of Perry is Perry. Singular is Perry. If there are a bunch of them in a group, you say that Perry or the Perry. If you need to identify a particular one without any physical motions, you describe their appearance. If two of them look alike, you describe like how far they are from one end or the other, and so on. They hate names. And when Summer was in the Hidden City before, which is what the place is called, she met this Perry and insisted on giving it a name because she couldn't remember the word in the Perry's language that described its appearance and everything. And she couldn't do that, and the Perry said, well, if you don't figure it out, you're just going to have to call me Fred. She said, okay, Fred. Fred it is. So Summer never did learn the words. And the Perry known as Fred sighed, looked at Summer and her gasped and said, you're still banned. In fact, all your kind are banned. Oh, you're still mad about that, said Summer. That was nothing. I'm surprised anyone even remembers. No, said Fred, I'm certain everyone remembers. I'm just as certain that you're going to be in a lot of trouble when the Order finds out you're here. Oh, they won't, said Summer. We'll be leaving as soon as we can. Now, said Fred, you can leave as soon as now. Lex interjected and asked, Summer, what did you do here? I'll tell you later, Summer told Lex before shifting her attention back to Fred. Please, Fred, you're the only one I know here. You're the only one I trust, and I need help. Exactly, Fred fumed. I'm the only one you know here, so when the Order catches you, who do you think they'll come after next? Lex asked, who exactly are the Order? That's not important right now, said Summer. The important thing right now is that we get something to help you against the Reapers. Just Max, said Lex. I can handle the other ones fine. It's just Max. Fred interrupted them both and said, is this another of your petty office problems? Summer, audibly offended, echoed the word petty. Look, said Lex, we're obviously in the wrong place. Let's just go. Oh, said Fred, you're using reverse psychology on me. No, said Lex. Listen, I can see right through you, said Fred. Summer butted in and asked, will you just help us already? I don't even know what you want, said Fred, and even if I wanted to, we both know that your even being here is going to bring the Order down on all of us. Lex asked again, What is this order? Never mind that, said Summer. Fred, my friend's life is in danger. She's probably going to die. If anyone I know can help her cheat death, it's you. Oh no, said Fred. You of all people should know that I want nothing to do with you and your schemes against death. It wasn't a scheme, Summer objected. I was young, I was in love. Oh, said Fred, and what are you now? Yeah, I'd like to know that too, said Lex. I'm desperate, Summer admitted. You're the only one who can help us. Just get out. Get out before the order comes. Yeah, said Lex, let's go. Whatever the order is, I don't want to stay and find out. No, Summer told Lex before turning her attention back to Fred. In fact, if you don't help us, we will stay here until the order does come. And when they do, I'll tell them you brought me here against my will. They'll never believe you, said Fred. Doesn't matter if they do, said Summer. They'll still take you along with us. Now this left Fred taken aback. Now whatever the order was, Lex could tell that Fred was terrified of it, or of them. She couldn't be sure, as they were barely acknowledging her, let alone answering her questions. One thing she could tell, though, was that both Summer and Fred were bluffing. Neither of them wanted anything to do with the order, and the body language of each betrayed their desperation of keeping the other from this realization. Summer was doing slightly better than Fred, though, but neither was doing especially well. So Lex, fed up with the slow, spiraling stalemate before her, decided to take action. She shouted, "Hey, order! Come and get us! We're right here!" She looked around, jumped up and down, and waved her arms as she did. "Stop that," Summer hissed as she covered her mouth. "You have no idea what you're doing. You both need to leave right now," shouted Fred. Summer regained some of her demeanor as she took her hand from Lex's mouth and turned back to Fred, asking, "What?" "Or," said Fred, "I'll file an official report on you." "Do it," said Summer. "The order will be here long before you're done." "Now, if one of you doesn't explain to me exactly what's going on," said Lex, "I'll start screaming again." "Fine," said Fred, turning and moving back to her desk. When she was seated, she glared once more at Summer, then tilted her head to regard Lex instead. "Before I do, just promise me you'll leave here as soon as we're done, and you won't mention me when the order catches up to you." "We can't promise that," said Summer. "Yes, we can," said Lex, "and we do. Now tell me what this is all about." "Well," said Summer, "this world is kind of like what we'd call magical." Fred chortled mockingly. "And my friend Fred here," she said, "well, she can help us." "I don't see how," said Fred. "I can't think of a single way in which anyone could help you." "She has to fight the devil," said Summer, motioning at Lex. "No, you mean the Reapers," said Lex. "Whatever," said Summer. "Anyway, look, I know you can help with that." Lex and Fred both said, "How?" "I don't know," said Summer. "I mean, you know everything about this world. Can't you just introduce us to a shaman or something?" "Even if I could," said Fred, "what help do you think that would be?" "Well, I mean, he could train her," said Summer. "He could teach her to use her powers." Lex asked, "My what?" "Oh," said Fred, "and what powers would those be?" "She's Native American," said Summer. Fred remained expressionless. Lex looked uncomfortable. "She comes from a deeply spiritual people," said Summer. "They have natural powers the rest of us don't. They're one with nature. They have totems and medicines and spiritual stuff." Lex looked at her feet and shifted. Summer went on. "So you just introduce us to a shaman and he can train her. He can teach her how to use her spiritual power. It's the only way." "Summer," said Lex, "I hate for this to be how you learn. In fact, I hate that you have to learn this at all, but I don't have any special Indian powers." "Well, no," said Summer, "not yet." "No, not at all," said Lex. "I'm not magical." Summer blinked and fell silent as a shocked, disappointed expression crawled across her face. "I'm just like you," said Lex, "except maybe I tan easier and I'm justifiably more bitter." A tear welled up in Summer's eyes as she said, "But I've read books and watched movies. Your people commune with nature. You fight the Wendigo and the Skinwalkers and the Tricksters." "Yeah, those are just books and movies," said Lex. "And even if I did, we don't have time for me to go off and train in magic." "Yes, we do," said Summer. "Time passes differently here. If you come in at the right time, at the right place, you can stay as long as you want and go back seconds later, or days or weeks." "Well," said Lex, "I still don't have magical Indian powers." "Not yet," Summer insisted. "No, not ever," said Lex. "As amusing as this all is," said Fred, looking first at Summer and then at Lex, to whom she continued to speak, "your problematic friend doesn't have it quite right." Summer said, "I don't?" "I could help you," the Perry said. "Wait," said Lex. "You mean I do have Indian powers?" "Well, that's doubtful," said Fred, "but there might be something I can do. First, you need to understand where you are and how our world encompasses your own." She paused and stared at the two young women, who stared back at her in turn, and each of the three seemed to be waiting for one of the other two to talk. This went on for a moment until Lex grew tired of the waiting and told the Perry, well, don't keep us in suspense. Fred leaned back and addressed Lex. This world, she said, the world of the Perry, is where the last of what you call your life goes to be reintegrated back into all things ever. Yeah, you're not making any sense, said Lex. Fine, said Fred. In terms you can understand, this is where we process your soul when you die. This is where we process the souls of the recently deceased. Summer added, though not always recently. Fred sighed and rolled her eyes and continued. Until about 10 of your years ago, this was a simple and straightforward process. Then one of the souls in Q escaped and made it back to your world. Lex asked how. Summer looked uncomfortable. I'll get to that, said Fred, if you'll stop interrupting. See, there was a young man who died rather tragically. Apparently he went on a small killing spree over some misunderstanding or another with his best friend, and his friend retaliated. Now there's no official record of this, of course, and I couldn't recall his name now if I tried, said Fred. Jan, said Summer, a hint of a whimper in her voice. His name was Jan. All right, said Fred, of course you remember. Now this particular soul manifested in Q, as all souls do, but someone from your world found her way here and started poking around until she learned just where his soul was, and before he could be properly processed, she freed him. I didn't do it alone, said Summer. I could never have done it without your help. A fact I'll thank you to never mention again, said Fred. It was one time, said Summer. I did one little thing wrong, and now I'm banned for life from the Hidden City. I do wish you'd stop calling it that, said Fred. Besides, your actions had consequences. I know, said Summer. I was banned. Now, beyond that, said Fred, we spent so much of our time and resources trying to recover that one, others started slipping through the cracks. Some of the worst of what you call souls all banded together and broke free. And then while we were busy with them, others got lodged in place. There's still one we can't get processed because his daughter's soul somehow got wrapped up in his own without her actually dying. Now, from what we can tell, her body lives on in your world, and we're stuck with her soul until we figure out some way to guide it back. And time.